The Apache woman was tied to the rancher's tree. She feared he would harm her, but the afternoon sun hung low in the sky, spreading a dull orange light across the wide land. The ranch stood alone, surrounded by dry grass, scattered bushes, and tall trees that had survived many harsh seasons. One of those trees, old and strong, stood at the edge of the ranch. Its branches were thick, its roots deep in the earth. That tree had seen many things, storms, animals, and people passing by, but today something different was happening beneath it. An Apache woman was tied to the trunk of that tree. Her hands were bound with rough rope, pulled tight enough to hurt but not enough to stop blood flow. The bark pressed into her back, rough and cold despite the heat. Her legs felt weak from standing too long and her throat was dry. She had not cried out. She knew better than to waste her strength. Fear sat heavy in her chest, steady and sharp, like a stone that would not move. She did not know the rancher well. In truth, she did not know him at all. She only knew what people whispered in her tribe. Stories passed from mouth to mouth, from one frightened voice to another. Stories of land taken, of families broken, of people who never returned. Those stories echoed in her mind now, louder than the wind, louder than her own breathing. She had not come here to cause trouble. Earlier that day, she had been walking carefully through the land, following a path she believed was still free. Her people had moved many times over the years, pushed farther and farther from places they once called home. Water was scarce. Food was harder to find. She had gone out alone to search, hoping to return before dark. She did not know the land now belonged to someone else. When the rancher first appeared, she froze. He had been riding slowly, watching the land like someone who expected danger. When he saw her, his body went stiff. His hand moved quickly, and his voice rose in alarm. Neither understood the other's words, but fear needs no language. She tried to explain with gestures, but he did not trust her. His eyes were sharp, his movements quick. Before she could turn away, he had grabbed her arm. The memory of that moment made her heart race again. Now tied to the tree, she stared at the ground, watching ants move across the dirt. She focused on small things, the sound of wind through grass, the creak of branches, anything to keep her mind from running too far ahead. Still, her thoughts betrayed her. What would he do? Would he hurt her, leave her there, call others? She had seen what fear could make people do. Her shoulders tensed when she heard footsteps. The rancher was coming back. She did not lift her head right away. She had learned long ago that looking someone in the eye could be taken as a challenge. Instead, she waited, her muscles ready to move if she saw even the smallest chance to escape. The rancher stopped a few steps away. He was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered, his clothes worn from long days of work. Dust clung to his boots. His face was marked by lines that came from years of sun and worry. He did not speak at first. He simply stood there, studying her as if trying to decide what kind of person she was. She felt his gaze and forced herself to stay still. In his mind, the rancher was struggling too. When he had first seen her, fear had taken control. He lived alone and the land had taught him to be cautious. Too many times people had come with bad intentions. He had reacted fast without thinking. But now, standing in front of her, he saw something he had not expected. She was tired, not dangerous, not angry, just tired. Her clothes were worn. Her face was thin, her eyes dark with worry. He noticed the way she shifted her weight, how the rope had left marks on her skin. A quiet unease crept into his chest. This did not look like someone who had come to harm him. Still, he did not step closer. The woman meant danger in his world, or so he had been taught. Yet the longer he looked at her, the harder it became to believe the stories he had grown up hearing. She was not shouting. She was not struggling. She was simply waiting, like someone who expected pain because pain was what life had always given her. The rancher cleared his throat. He spoke, slow and low, though he knew she might not understand his words. His voice was not sharp. It carried no threat. The woman flinched at the sound but did not move. She listened carefully, trying to read meaning in his tone instead of his language. He took a step back instead of forward. That surprised her. Most people moved closer when they wanted control. Stepping back meant space, and space meant choice. She raised her head slightly, just enough to see him from the corner of her eye. Their gazes met for a brief moment before she looked away again. The rancher turned and walked toward his house. Her heart pounded harder as he left. Fear rushed in again, stronger than before. Leaving could mean many things. He could be getting something worse. He could be calling others. She tested the rope gently, but it held firm. Her breath grew shallow and she pressed her lips together to stay calm. Minutes passed. Each one felt long. When he returned, he carried a small metal cup and a piece of cloth. He approached slowly, stopping well before reaching her. He set the cup on the ground, nudging it closer with his boot. The water inside caught the sunlight. Then he placed the cloth beside it. He stepped away again. The woman stared at the water. Her mouth felt dry just looking at it. Still, she hesitated. Taking it could make her vulnerable, but thirst was stronger than fear. Slowly, carefully, she bent down and drank, keeping her eyes on him the whole time. Nothing happened. The water cooled her throat, and for the first time since being tied, she felt a small sense of relief. She wiped her mouth with the cloth, her hands shaking slightly. When she looked up again, the rancher was still standing where he had been, his arms loose at his sides. No anger, no raised voice, just silence. As the sun sank lower, shadows stretched across the land. The heat softened, replaced by a gentle breeze. The rancher watched the sky, then looked back at her. He walked closer this time, but slowly, giving her time to react. When he reached the rope, he did not touch it right away. He paused. The woman held her breath. Then, carefully, he loosened it just a little, not enough to free her, but enough to ease the pressure. He stepped back again, as if to show he would not take advantage of her weakness. Confusion replaced some of her fear. Why would someone who meant harm be so careful? She did not trust him yet. Trust was not something given easily, but something had changed. The stories in her head no longer matched the man standing in front of her. Night was coming. She could feel it in the air. Both of them stood there, separated by history, fear, and silence, unaware that this moment, quiet and uncertain, was the beginning of a truth neither of them expected. Night slowly covered the land, bringing cooler air and long shadows. The ranch became quiet, except for the soft sounds of insects and the distant call of an owl. The Apache woman stood beneath the tree, her arms still bound, but the rope no longer cut into her skin the way it had before. The loosened knots gave her a small comfort, though fear still lived inside her chest. She shifted her weight carefully, testing how much she could move. Her muscles ached, and her feet were sore from standing too long. Still, she did not complain. She had learned from life that silence often kept her safer than words. The rancher walked back toward his house, but this time he did not go far. He sat on the wooden steps near the door, where he could still see her clearly. He rested his elbows on his knees and stared out at the land. His face looked tired, not cruel. The fire inside the house glowed faintly through the window behind him. He had not planned for the day to end like this. When he woke that morning, his only thought was work. The land always needed something. Fences broke, animals wandered, tools wore down. He lived a simple life, but it was not an easy one. Years ago, after losing his family, he had chosen to live alone. The silence suited him. It asked nothing of him. Yet now that silence felt heavy. He glanced toward the tree again. The woman had not tried to escape. She had not cried out. That bothered him more than if she had fought. He remembered the fear in her eyes when he first grabbed her arm. At the time, he had told himself he was doing what was necessary. People warned him often to be careful. Stories traveled fast in lonely places, and fear traveled faster. But stories were not always true. He rubbed his hands together, feeling the rough skin shaped by years of labor. His mind went back to his childhood, to the lessons taught by his father and others around him. They spoke of danger, of protecting what was yours at all costs. They did not speak much about understanding. The woman beneath the tree was not the threat he had imagined. She was smaller than him, weaker from hunger and exhaustion. He could see it in the way she leaned against the trunk, using it for support. Every now and then she looked toward the open land, as if measuring the distance between herself and freedom. He sighed quietly. Across the yard, the woman watched him too. She could not understand his words, but she could read his actions. He had not shouted. He had not raised his hand. He had brought water. He had eased the rope. These were not the actions of someone who wished her harm, yet she did not allow herself hope. Hope had hurt her before. She thought of her people, scattered and tired, always moving. She thought of the elders who spoke of respect for the land, for life, even for strangers. They had taught her to see beyond fear when possible, but they had also taught her to survive. Right now, survival meant staying calm and waiting. Time passed slowly. The moon rose, lighting the land with a pale glow. The rancher stood and went inside the house for a moment. When he returned, he carried a blanket and a small plate of food. He approached the tree again, his steps steady and unhurried. The woman stiffened, her breath catching in her throat. He stopped a few steps away and knelt, placing the blanket on the ground near her feet. Then he set the plate beside it. He did not push them toward her. He simply left them where they were and stepped back. She stared at the food. Her stomach tightened with hunger. The smell alone made her head spin slightly. Still, she waited, watching him carefully. When he turned and walked away again, she slowly bent down and picked up the plate. She ate quietly, quickly, but not carelessly. Each bite brought strength back into her body. The blanket she pulled around her shoulders, grateful for the warmth as the night grew colder. For the first time since being tied, her shaking eased. The rancher watched from a distance, his chest tightening with something he could not name. Guilt, perhaps, or regret. He had tied her to protect himself, he told himself again. But the more he watched her eat, the weaker that excuse sounded. She looked like someone who had already lost too much. The land had taken from her, just as it had taken from him in different ways. Later that night, he approached once more. This time, he carried a knife. The woman saw the shape in his hand and froze. Her heart raced, fear flooding back stronger than before. She pressed herself against the tree, her body tense and ready for pain. He noticed her reaction and stopped immediately. Slowly, carefully, he lowered the knife and placed it on the ground. Then he stepped back several paces and raised his empty hands, palms open. He spoke softly, his voice low and steady. Though she could not understand the words, she understood the message in his movements. He meant no harm. After a long moment, he stepped forward again, picked up the knife, and gently cut the rope around her wrists. The fibers fell away, dropping to the ground. He stepped back at once, giving her space. She stood there, stunned. Her arms were free. She rubbed her wrists slowly, testing the feeling, half expecting the freedom to disappear. When it did not, she looked at him fully for the first time. Their eyes met in the moonlight. Neither spoke. Words were not needed. She did not run. That surprised him. Instead, she took a step back, creating distance, but she stayed. Her body language showed caution, not attack. She understood that freedom did not always mean safety, but she also sensed that this man was not her enemy. The rancher gestured toward the open land, pointing toward a direction away from his home. He then pointed toward the horizon, making it clear she could leave when she wished. He stepped aside, leaving a clear path. She hesitated. Leaving now in the dark carried its own dangers. The land was wide and unfamiliar. She weighed her choices carefully. Finally, she shook her head gently and sat near the tree, keeping her distance from him. She wrapped the blanket tighter around herself. The rancher nodded once, accepting her decision. He returned to the house but left the door slightly open, the light spilling out softly. He sat near the entrance, not inside, not outside, keeping watch without closing himself off. The night passed slowly but without incident. As dawn approached, the sky began to change color, soft blues and pale gold spreading across the horizon. The woman stood, stretching her sore limbs. She felt weak but alive. She looked toward the rancher who had not slept much. His eyes were tired but calm. They stood facing each other in the early light. Something unspoken had formed between them, not trust, not friendship, but understanding. Both had acted out of fear. Both had chosen in the end to step away from it. The land felt different now. The rancher pointed toward a safer path, one that would lead her away from danger and toward water. He gathered a small bundle of supplies and set it on the ground between them. She nodded in thanks, placing a hand over her heart in a gesture of respect. Then, without another word, she turned and began to walk away. He watched her go until she became a small figure against the rising sun. He knew this moment would stay with him for the rest of his life. Not because of what he had done wrong, but because of what he had chosen to do right. The morning light grew stronger as the sun rose higher in the sky. The land slowly woke up. Birds flew low over the grass, and the cool air of night began to fade. The Apache woman walked away from the ranch with careful steps, the small bundle of supplies resting against her side. Every few moments she glanced back, half expecting the rancher to change his mind and call her back. But he did not move. He only stood there watching quietly until she was far enough away. As she walked, her thoughts felt heavy. Freedom should have felt light, but fear still followed her like a shadow. She had been released, yet her heart had not fully relaxed. She knew too well how quickly kindness could turn into danger. Still, she could not forget what had happened the night before. The water, the food, the way he stepped back instead of forward. These things did not fit the stories she had grown up hearing. She stopped near a small rise in the land and rested. Her legs trembled from weakness, and she sat on a rock to catch her breath. She opened the bundle and checked what the rancher had given her. There was dried food, a small container of water, and a simple cloth. Nothing extra. Nothing meant to control her, just enough to help her move forward. She looked toward the sky and whispered a quiet prayer of thanks, not just for the supplies, but for being alive. Back at the ranch, the man stood alone in the open yard. The space beneath the tree felt empty now, yet it pulled at his attention. He could still see her there in his mind, tied and silent, watching him with guarded eyes. He rubbed his face and let out a slow breath. He had not expected to feel this way. For years, he had lived with his choices locked tightly inside him. He told himself that the past was finished, that there was no use in reopening old wounds. But something about the woman had stirred those buried feelings. Her quiet strength reminded him of things he had tried hard to forget: loss, regret, and the cost of fear. He turned and walked toward the fence, checking the posts without really seeing them. His hands moved out of habit, but his mind was far away. Over and over he asked himself the same question. What kind of man had he almost become? The thought made his chest tighten. As the woman continued her journey, the land began to feel familiar again. The shapes of distant hills, the bend of the earth, the direction of the wind, all of it spoke to her in a language she understood. She followed signs only she could read: broken grass, marks in the dirt, the quiet promise of water somewhere ahead. Yet her thoughts kept returning to the ranch. She remembered the moment the knife appeared in his hand and how fear had rushed through her like fire. That moment could have ended very differently. One wrong move, one wrong choice, and her story would have stopped there. The fact that it did not made her uneasy. Why had he chosen mercy? She had seen people driven by fear before. She had seen what fear did to hearts. It closed them, hardened them. Yet that man had opened his hand instead of closing it. She walked on, but the question stayed with her. Hours later, as the sun climbed higher, she reached a small stream. She knelt and drank, washing her face and wrists. The marks from the rope were still there, red and sore. She touched them gently, reminding herself that pain could fade even if memory did not. She rested there longer than planned. Her body needed it, but her spirit did too. She thought of her people and the long road they had traveled. She wondered what stories they would tell in the future. Would this moment become another warning passed down through fear, or could it become something else? Back at the ranch, the man sat at his table, staring at untouched food. He was not hungry. The house felt too quiet, the walls closing in around him. He stood suddenly and stepped outside, breathing deeply as if the open air might steady him. He thought about the land he claimed as his own. He had worked it for years, shaping it, protecting it, believing it belonged only to him because he had suffered for it. But the truth felt more complicated now. Others had lived on this land long before him. Others had suffered too. The idea made him uncomfortable, but he did not push it away. Later that day, he rode out to check the far edge of his property. As he moved through the grass, he noticed tracks near the stream. Fresh ones, human ones. He slowed his horse, his heart beating faster. For a moment, old fear rose again. Then he recognized the pattern of the steps. They were hers. She had not returned to threaten him. She had only passed through, following the path he had shown her. Relief washed over him, followed by something close to shame for doubting her. He dismounted and knelt, touching the ground lightly. The tracks led away, steady and purposeful. She was moving forward. That night the woman made camp near the hills. She built a small fire, careful to keep it low. As she ate, she stared into the flames, lost in thought. Fire had always been a teacher to her people. It could destroy, but it could also guide. Fear was the same. She realized something then. She had feared the rancher because of stories. He had feared her for the same reason. Both had been shaped by words spoken long before they ever met. Yet when faced with a choice, he had stepped away from fear. That choice mattered. As days passed, the woman rejoined her people. She spoke little at first, watching and listening. When the elders asked where she had been, she told them the truth, but she told it carefully. She did not hide her fear. She did not hide the danger, but she also spoke of the water, the food, and the rope that had been cut. Some listened. Some did not. Change came slowly, like dawn. Meanwhile, the rancher found himself thinking differently too. When strangers passed near his land, he watched with caution, but also with patience. He no longer reached for fear first. He remembered the quiet strength of the woman beneath the tree and the way the land had felt afterward. Both lives continued. They never met again, not face to face, but something had shifted for each of them. A truth had been revealed in silence, in small actions, in the space between fear and choice. Sometimes, the most dangerous moment is not when harm is done, but when harm is almost done, and a different path is chosen instead. The day was warm, and the sun hung high in the sky, shining over the rolling hills and dry grass of the land. The Apache woman walked slowly, carrying the small bundle the rancher had given her. Her legs were sore, and her arms ached from the tension she had felt when tied to the tree. But with each step, she felt a little stronger, as if the small acts of kindness had given her courage she did not know she had. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her entirely. She moved carefully through the land, following signs that only someone familiar with nature could notice. The direction of broken branches, the smell of water in the wind, the tracks of animals that showed where food and safety might be found. Every now and then she paused, listening to the quiet hum of life around her. She felt alive in a way she had not in a long time. Yet, even with the freedom, her mind kept returning to the rancher. She remembered his hands, the way he had set the water and food before her, the gentle way he had loosened the rope. She could not understand why someone who had the power to control or hurt her had chosen not to. She could not forget the small gestures of trust and patience. They had changed the way she saw the world, and more importantly, the way she saw people. Back at the ranch, the rancher was busy with work but distracted. He checked the fences, repaired broken posts, and tended to the animals, yet his mind was elsewhere. He thought about the woman beneath the tree, her cautious eyes, and the way she had moved. He reflected on the choices he had made and the ones he might have made differently. He realized that fear had guided his actions for too long, and this realization made him uneasy. He remembered the night before, the moments when he had almost reached for the knife, the tension in the air and the fear in her eyes. The fear had been real on both sides, but he had stepped back. He had given her space and choice, and that choice had mattered more than he had understood at the time. He realized that real strength was not in control or domination, but in understanding and patience. The woman continued walking toward a safer place, her body tired but her spirit growing stronger with each step. She thought of her people and the stories they told, stories of loss, survival, and resilience. She realized that the way she lived her life could be shaped not just by fear, but by the decisions she made in moments of danger. When she arrived at a small stream, she rested again, drinking water slowly and washing the dirt and sweat from her face. She unwrapped the cloth the rancher had given her and used it to clean her hands. The rope marks on her wrists were still visible, red and sore, but they did not hurt as much as before. Each scar, each mark, told a story of survival, and she began to see them as reminders of her strength rather than only of fear. As the day passed, she found a small grove to rest in. The shade of the trees offered comfort, and the soft rustling of leaves calmed her. She ate some of the dried food, savoring it slowly. She reflected on what had happened at the ranch, thinking about the choices she and the rancher had made. The world was full of stories, some true, some false, and some shaped by fear. Yet in that quiet grove, she felt she had found a truth of her own, that not all people acted according to the worst stories, and that moments of compassion could exist even in places where danger seemed certain. Meanwhile, the rancher rode along the far edges of his land, checking the perimeter. He noticed tracks near the stream she had passed, fresh and careful, showing that she had survived the journey. Relief filled him, but it was mixed with something else. Regret that fear had almost ruled the moment. Regret that he had not acted sooner with understanding instead of caution. He realized that fear had shaped too many of his decisions over the years, and he vowed silently to let compassion guide him more often. The woman spent the evening resting near the grove, keeping watch on the surroundings. She knew the land could be dangerous, but she felt a quiet confidence now that had not been there before. She remembered the rancher's gestures, the water, the food, the knife set aside, the rope loosened, and understood that sometimes actions spoke louder than words. Even without language, people could communicate respect, trust, and care. The night came gently, with a soft breeze moving through the leaves. The stars began to appear, scattered across the sky like tiny lights guiding the way. The woman sat quietly, thinking about the land, her people, and the rancher. She realized that fear was natural, but it did not have to define her. She could choose her response, her actions, and her path forward. That knowledge gave her a quiet strength she had never felt before. Back at the ranch, the rancher sat on the steps of his house, the night cool around him. He thought about the woman's journey, knowing she had made it safely so far. He also thought about himself, the choices he had made, and how small acts could have a great impact. For the first time in many years, he considered what it meant to truly act with humanity rather than fear. The next morning, the woman continued her journey toward her people. She moved carefully but with more confidence. She found small signs of life around her, a rabbit darting through the grass, birds calling from the trees, fresh water flowing in the stream. Each sign reassured her that the world was not only dangerous, but also full of life and opportunity. She reached the edge of a familiar ridge and looked out over the land below. In the distance, she could see the small group of people she belonged to, moving slowly through the valley. Relief and joy filled her chest. She knew that reaching them safely meant more than survival. It meant connection, safety, and community. When she joined her people, she told them carefully about what had happened. She spoke of fear, of being tied, of the moments when she thought all hope was lost. She also spoke of kindness, small gestures that had changed everything, and the choice the rancher had made not to harm her. Her people listened quietly, some surprised, some skeptical, but all felt the weight of her story, the lesson it carried about fear, choice, and humanity. The rancher continued his work on the ranch, but he was changed too. He no longer treated every stranger as a potential threat. He acted with patience, watching and listening more carefully. The memory of the woman beneath the tree reminded him that fear was natural, but it could be overcome with thought, patience, and respect. Over time, both lives returned to their usual patterns, yet the memory of that day lingered. For the woman, it was a lesson in survival, trust, and the quiet strength of compassion. For the rancher, it was a lesson in understanding, patience, and the power of choice. They never saw each other again, but the moment they shared continued to shape the decisions they made in the years that followed. Sometimes, the most dangerous moments are the ones that almost happen, but are stopped by a small act of courage or kindness. For both the woman and the rancher, that day beneath the tree would always remain a turning point, a quiet reminder that fear and humanity coexist, and that every choice matters. The land settled into evening once again, the air calm, the grass waving softly in the breeze. Life continued, full of danger, beauty, and unexpected moments. And both the woman and the rancher moved forward, carrying the lessons of that day in their hearts, each step guided not just by fear, but by understanding, compassion, and the quiet strength that comes from surviving and from choosing wisely. The sun was just beginning to rise over the horizon, painting the sky with soft oranges and pinks. The air was fresh, carrying the smell of earth, grass, and distant water. The Apache woman walked steadily, her small bundle of supplies resting lightly against her side. Her body ached from the journey, but her spirit was stronger now than it had been when she was tied to the tree. Each step was a mixture of caution and determination, and she kept her eyes alert for any signs of danger or guidance from the land. She had traveled carefully through valleys and over hills, following streams and worn paths that only someone with experience and patience could read. The food and water the rancher had provided kept her going, but more than that, the memory of his calm gestures lingered in her mind. Each step she took reminded her that even in moments of fear, people had the power to make choices that changed outcomes. The land stretched before her, wide and open, yet filled with small dangers. Loose rocks, thorny bushes, and hidden holes forced her to stay alert, but they also reminded her of the resilience she had learned from her people. Every careful step, every glance at the horizon, reminded her of how much she had endured and how far she had come. Back at the ranch, the man stood quietly outside his house, watching the horizon where the first light of morning touched the earth. He had risen before dawn, unable to sleep. The events of the previous days played in his mind again and again. He thought of the woman beneath the tree, her eyes wide with fear, her body tense, her movements cautious. He thought of his own actions, of the knife he had almost raised, and of the rope he had carefully loosened instead. It struck him that in the span of a few moments, lives could change forever. A small choice, a single act of patience or understanding, could alter the path of another person, and sometimes even his own. He felt a quiet relief knowing that he had chosen restraint over fear. He also felt a new sense of responsibility. The world was unpredictable and kindness was not always easy, but he realized it was necessary. The woman paused near a small rise to rest. She opened her bundle and checked the water and food. She drank slowly, savoring every sip, and ate a little of the dried food. Her body needed the nourishment, but she also knew she needed to rest her mind. The journey had been long, and the fear had not fully left her, even though it no longer ruled her. She sat on a rock, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin. The rope marks on her wrists were fading, but the memory of being tied remained. She touched them gently, a reminder of both the danger she had faced and the strength she had found. In her heart she felt gratitude, not only for surviving, but for the lesson she had received in compassion and restraint. As the day grew warmer, she continued her journey toward the area where her people lived. She moved carefully but with growing confidence. She could see familiar landmarks now, the shapes of distant hills, the flow of the streams, and the patterns of the trees. Each sign reassured her that she was on the right path. She felt a connection to the land and to the lessons it had quietly taught her. Meanwhile, the rancher continued his work on the ranch, but he was different now. He repaired fences, checked on the animals, and tended the land, but his mind was more thoughtful, more aware. He watched the signs around him, the tracks of animals, the patterns of the wind, the changes in the earth. He realized that living with awareness required patience and understanding, not just strength. Days passed, and the woman reached the area where her people were gathered. Relief and joy filled her heart as she saw familiar faces. She was greeted with hugs, cautious questions, and careful smiles. She shared her story carefully, telling of the fear she had felt, the moments when she thought she might not survive, and the unexpected kindness of the man who had tied her. She spoke of the water, the food, the rope that had been loosened, and the gesture of letting her go freely. Her people listened intently. Some were skeptical at first, having only heard stories of strangers as dangers. Others understood immediately, recognizing the value of small acts of compassion in a world often ruled by fear. The story became a lesson for the group, a reminder that courage and trust could exist even in dangerous circumstances. The woman stayed with her people, regaining strength and sharing her experience. She moved carefully through her daily life, yet with a new sense of confidence. She knew that fear would always be a part of life, but she also knew that her choices could define how she responded. She could act with patience, with caution, and with understanding, and in doing so she could survive and thrive. Back at the ranch, the man watched the horizon often, thinking of the woman and the journey she had taken. He reflected on his own life and the choices he had made. He realized that kindness and patience were not signs of weakness, but of strength. The lessons of that encounter had changed him, shaping his interactions with others and guiding him toward a life more thoughtful and compassionate. Weeks later, the woman looked out over the land from a high ridge. She felt the wind on her face and the warmth of the sun. The journey had been long, but she was stronger because of it. The memory of the rancher, of his careful actions and restraint, remained with her. She realized that even though they would never meet again, the moment they had shared had changed both of their lives. The rancher continued to live on his land, tending to the animals and the fences, watching the horizon, and remembering the choice he had made. He knew that fear could return at any moment, but he also knew that he could act with understanding and patience. That memory of the woman beneath the tree remained a guide for him, a reminder of the importance of compassion even in uncertain times. In the end, both the woman and the rancher moved forward with their lives, shaped by the encounter beneath the tree. They had faced fear, made choices, and found strength in unexpected ways. The land continued to stretch out before them, filled with challenges, beauty, and opportunity. And each step they took carried the lesson that courage, patience, and kindness could exist even in the most uncertain moments. Sometimes, the most important changes happen in silence, in the quiet spaces between fear and action. For the Apache woman and the rancher, the day beneath the tree was that moment, a small, powerful turning point that would influence every choice they made in the years to come. The world continued around them, full of danger, life, and possibility, and they carried forward the knowledge that every act of understanding and every choice of compassion could make all the difference. Even as they went their separate ways, their story remained, a story of fear faced, of choices made, and of humanity recognized. The memory of the tree, the rope, the water, and the food would always remind them that sometimes, even in the most difficult circumstances, a single act of kindness could change the course of a life. The sun set on the land, casting long shadows and golden light over hills and valleys. Life went on with all its dangers and wonders, but for both the woman and the rancher, the lesson of that day remained clear. Fear does not have to define us, and compassion can create paths where none seemed possible. They had survived, learned, and grown, and that truth would guide them for the rest of their lives.